A man once considered the wealthiest person in America spent the final decades of his life living in darkened hotel rooms, refusing to cut his hair or nails, terrified of germs to a degree that left him isolated from almost everyone around him. His name was Howard Hughes. Born in Texas in 1905, he inherited his father's tool manufacturing company at 18 after both parents died within a few years of each other, and used that inheritance to fund an extraordinary range of ventures across aviation, filmmaking, and eventually a vast business empire spanning defense contracting and real estate. In his younger years, Hughes was genuinely remarkable, a daring aviator who personally set multiple world speed records flying aircraft he'd helped design, a Hollywood film producer and director behind several successful and controversial movies, and a shrewd businessman who built Hughes Aircraft Company into a major defense contractor. Morgan Housel has written that early, dramatic success can sometimes mask underlying instabilities that only become visible much later, once the specific pressures and isolation that come with extreme wealth and fame have had years to compound. Hughes survived several serious aviation accidents throughout his career, including a nearly fatal crash in 1946 that left him with significant, lasting injuries and, according to several biographers, may have contributed to or intensified underlying psychological difficulties, including what many mental health professionals who've studied his life have described as symptoms consistent with obsessive-compulsive disorder. Benjamin Graham's investment philosophy emphasized the discipline of separating an asset's genuine value from surrounding noise and distraction. Hughes, in his early business career, demonstrated something similar in his professional judgment, but as his personal psychological difficulties intensified over subsequent decades, that same discipline appears to have become increasingly difficult for him to maintain, both in his personal life and, eventually, in aspects of his business decision-making as well. Daniel Kahneman's research into how untreated mental health conditions can compound over time, particularly without adequate treatment or support, helps illuminate part of Hughes's later trajectory. As his specific fears, particularly around germs and contamination, intensified throughout the 1950s and 1960s, he became increasingly isolated, eventually living for extended periods in darkened hotel rooms, communicating with the outside world primarily through a small circle of aides, while his personal hygiene and physical health deteriorated dramatically despite his access to essentially unlimited financial resources. Robert Kiyosaki's core lesson about understanding what actually generates lasting value applies here in an unusual, deeply human direction. Hughes's business empire, for years, continued operating and generating substantial revenue even as his own personal life became increasingly dysfunctional, a stark illustration that financial success and personal well-being, while sometimes connected, are ultimately separate outcomes that don't automatically protect each other. By the time of his death in 1976, Hughes had become almost a mythological figure specifically because of how completely he'd withdrawn from public life during his final years, despite remaining, on paper, one of the wealthiest people in the country. His actual physical condition at death, according to medical examiners, reflected severe malnutrition and other serious, long-standing health problems that his enormous wealth had done essentially nothing to prevent or address. Here's an honest complication worth including, since Hughes's later psychological difficulties are sometimes discussed without appropriate care or accuracy. Hughes was never formally diagnosed with a specific mental health condition during his own lifetime, given both the era's more limited understanding of obsessive-compulsive disorder and his own extreme isolation from any consistent medical care during his later years. Subsequent analysis by mental health historians examining his documented behavior patterns has suggested probable OCD and related conditions, but these remain retrospective assessments rather than a formal, contemporaneous clinical diagnosis. George S. Classen's advice about wealth being valuable specifically for what it enables in a person's actual life applies here as a genuinely sobering counterpoint. Hughes's fortune, by the end of his life, had failed to purchase him basic physical comfort, meaningful relationships, or genuine peace, illustrating clearly that financial resources alone, without adequate attention to underlying well-being, can't automatically produce a life anyone would genuinely want to live. This isn't a simple story warning that wealth itself causes psychological suffering, or suggesting Hughes's specific difficulties were somehow an inevitable consequence of his success. Many extraordinarily wealthy people live full, connected, genuinely healthy lives. What makes Hughes's story worth remembering, with appropriate care regarding how we discuss mental health, is the specific illustration it offers. Financial success, however extraordinary, doesn't automatically address underlying psychological difficulties, and can sometimes even provide the specific isolation and resources that allow those difficulties to deepen, largely unchecked by the kind of outside intervention ordinary life circumstances might otherwise provide. So here's a question worth sitting with. If you were suddenly given unlimited financial resources tomorrow, do you have people in your life who would genuinely tell you if your behavior or well-being seemed to be declining, rather than simply going along with whatever you wanted? Before you leave, I want to hear from you. Do you think extreme wealth makes it harder for people to get genuine, honest feedback about their own well-being from those around them? Read a few comments before you go. Some of the most thoughtful reflections on this channel come from people who've seen how isolation, wealth, or power can affect someone's ability to receive honest feedback. Next week, I'll pick one comment and send its author one of the books that inspired this channel. And if these stories help you think differently about money, you'll find a way to support future research in the description. Every contribution helps buy books, access research, and keep this content free for everyone. Remember this. Howard Hughes had enough money to buy almost anything in the world. He simply couldn't buy the one thing that might have actually helped, someone close enough, and trusted enough, to tell him the truth. If you or someone you know is struggling with symptoms of obsessive-compulsive disorder or other mental health challenges, please reach out to a mental health professional. Support and effective treatment are available.